Thanks, Preet. Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to our friends in Alaska and points west. I'm Tony Stride. I'm the Principal Investigator for the National Center on Afterschool and Summer Enrichment, or NCASE. And on behalf of all of our team, I want to thank you for joining us today. The materials we're presenting in this webinar are several years in the making, and so we're very excited to be unveiling them for you all and sharing some of our discoveries. This work began as an effort on NCASE's part to communicate as completely as possible the full extent of school-age child care supported through the Child Care and Development Fund. And we hope the data we share today will help the field advance quality care and increase access for school-age children across the country. Before we get started, I just want to thank the Administration for Children and Families Office of Child Care for supporting this center, and also to thank our Federal Project Officer, Amy Spates, for her tireless efforts in guiding all our work, especially the data we're sharing today. Joining me in this webinar is my colleague Heidi Rosenberg, the Director of Research for NCASE, who has spearheaded the efforts to produce the profiles we'll be sharing with you. She will talk about the process and covering the data within the profiles and how you can access and use all we've discovered. Also joining us is Jen Reithart, Senior Vice President for Research and Policy at the Afterschool Alliance. The Alliance is a contributing organization to NCASE, and they are one of several entities who helped us with the data work. Jen will be sharing some of Alliance's own efforts to research the field of out-of-school time and how our new CCDF data can be mapped to related efforts. Just a quick review of our agenda. We'll be sharing some of the context for the data work and why we feel it was a critical next step for NCASE in the field. We'll share the process we used for developing the national, state, and territory profiles. We'll also be sharing the online database that was developed to house the state and territory profiles. Then Jen will discuss the Afterschool Alliance's work and related resources. And we'll have time at the end for a Q&A, though you're welcome throughout the webinar to pose questions via the Connect Room chat window. With every webinar we host, we always like to start by reminding people that NCASE is part of a national training and technical assistance system funded by the Administration for Children and Families. The network of national centers supports states, territories, and tribes in implementing the Child Care Development Fund, or CCDF, which provides low-income families, specifically those with children birth through 12 who are working or participating in education, with help paying for child care. The broad goal of NCASE is to ensure that school-age children and families of low income have increased access to after-school and summer learning experiences that contribute to children's overall development and academic achievement. Also, we always like to share that when NCASE was launched a little more than 2 years ago, one of the first things that we developed was a resource library for the field containing the latest research and information on school-age care. We update this library on an ongoing basis, and we're always looking for recommendations on items relevant to the field. But today, we're unveiling a new resource that we think is equally exciting, and I'd like to introduce Heidi Rosenberg, NCASE's Director of Research, to talk about the history of the data work we're sharing and the process used to develop the state profiles. Heidi?
Great, thanks Tony. So the overall goal of this part of our work is to use data to tell the story of school-age childcare, specifically through the lens of CCDF and other investments or policies that impact the CCDF landscape. So to do this, what we do is combine CCDF enrollment statistics, which are the data submitted by states to the federal government about the numbers of children served, the settings in which they're served, and other information, with state policies and practices that can impact families' access to and the supply of school-age childcare. So one of the most exciting aspects of this work is that we get to build on ACF's expanded definition of school age. When NCASE was created, ACF defined school age as 5 through 12 years old to reflect the fact that kindergartners also need access to quality after-school and summer childcare. Previously, school age generally referred to children aged 6 and older in ACF data figures. So with the inclusion of the 5-year-olds in this age category, we are able to show that a much larger proportion of children served through subsidies are school age than what was previously thought, which we hope will help spur increased attention to the needs of this age group and greater investments in quality improvement efforts related to school age childcare. So our work also builds on what other organizations have done to illustrate the needs of the school-age population and show the reach of after-school programs. And in particular, we were inspired by the After School Alliance's state fact sheets that highlighted 21st Century Community Learning Center investments and the results of their America After 3 p.m. survey. So we wanted our work to complement but not duplicate the Alliance's reports and focus specifically on children served through CCDF. So our data work has been a truly collaborative effort with key contributions from a number of other organizations. We worked with the Office of Child Care's National Center on Data and Reporting to obtain the state-level enrollment statistics, After School Alliance to obtain data related to the 21st Century Program, Build for data related to school-age programs in QRIS, and Child Care Aware of America to understand more about child care resource and referral networks, which handle much of the consumer education related to school-age child care options. We also wanted to use our data reports to call attention to the statewide after-school networks and National After-School Association state affiliates so that stakeholders know where they can turn for help with advancing after-school and summer programs in their state. So, all of this data digging has resulted in a new product that we're very excited to launch, a series of data profiles of federal supports for after-school and summer childcare. The product has several component parts: an infographic-style national data profile, which is an updated version of the national profile on school-age childcare that we released 2 years ago, 56 separate state and territory data profiles, and a set of appendices that present all of the data points from the profiles arranged by state and territory to give people quick at-a-glance overviews of similarities and differences across states. And to house all of these reports, we developed an interactive state database to allow for easy access to each state's information, as well as the aggregated national report. So an important thing to note is that the most recent approved CCDF data are from fiscal year 2015. So that is the time period we used for both the CCDF statistics and the 21st century data. So we're aware that more recent 21st century data are available now, but we wanted to align the reporting periods so that the program data didn't reflect completely different fiscal environments. And information about state policies come from the 2016-2018 CCDF state plans, which are the most current plans available. As you probably know, states are currently working on their next set of plans, which will be due in July, and will cover the time span of 2019 to 2021. The data related to QRIS and school age and CCR&R networks are up to date. So before releasing the profiles, we also sent the data out to each state through NCASE's regional representative to make sure our information was accurate. So on the next set of slides, I'm going to walk you through some of the components of the data profiles. And we posted the link to the database in the section labeled Additional Information down in the lower left under the chat pod. Since the screen images are going to be small, we do invite you to toggle over to the actual database if you want to get a more close-up view of the sections that I'm going to be talking about. So here we have the national data profile, which presents averages or aggregate numbers across all states and territories. So if you're on the database website, you can access the national profile under National Resources. And as you can see, nearly half of 45% of children served through subsidies are school age. And as I mentioned before, in the past, the school age parameters typically started at age 6, which resulted in an overall average of around 1/3 of all children served through subsidies being school age. By including the 5-year-olds, we now see that the school age population is a much larger piece of the overall subsidy population. We also see that the average monthly subsidy paid to providers for school-age childcare is $335 per month, and this is an average across all setting types. Each month, an average of over 635,000 school-age children are served through subsidies, and the majority of those children, or 70%, are served in child care centers. This category includes school-based programs as well as community centers, and just over 1/4 are served in family child care settings, and a small percentage, 4%, are served in their own homes. So because our center focuses on after-school and summer care, we also wanted to pull out data specifically related to summer. So we found that 30 states and territories see a double-digit % increase in the number of children served during the summer months of June through August. Nationally, the overall average change is a 6% increase in the number of children served during the summer months, but there's a lot of variation here across states and territories for as yet unknown reasons. We're going to be looking into that in the coming year to see what might be driving those trends. So we also include information on the federally funded 21st Century Program for the 2014-2015 program year, again to align with the 2015 fiscal year time period of the CCDF enrollment statistics. We see that there were close to 5,000 21st Century grantees, representing over 12,000 program sites and well over 1 million children served. We should note that the 21st Century enrollment numbers include children from kindergarten up through grade 12, so that is a broader age range than what CCDF serves. So on the second page, we highlight state-level policies and practices that can impact families' access to and the quality of school-age child care. So child care resource and referral agencies handle consumer education and help families connect with child care providers who accept subsidies. While not specific to school age, they do help families access school-age child care. So we wanted to highlight whether states had a state-funded network of CCR&Rs on the assumption that a network would help to streamline information sharing and make the process more efficient. And we found that 29 states have this in place. We see that 42 state and territory lead agencies require training and professional development to support the positive development of school-age children. And this data comes from the CCDF state plans and notes whether lead agencies choose to require this type of training. As you can see, the majority of states and territories do. The use of grants and contracts for child care slots is one way that states can help to create a more stable supply of child care. We examined the CCDF state plans and found that 26 states and territories make use of grants and contracts for child care slots, and among those, 14 do so as a way to increase the supply and or quality of school-age child care. So we also looked across multiple sources to determine whether states had a QRIS in place, and if so, whether school-age child care programs were eligible to participate in it. We also looked to see whether states required all CCDF-funded programs to participate in the QRIS. We found that of the 46 existing QRIS systems, 26 allow school-age programs to participate, and 11 require participation of all CCDF-funded programs. There's also several other states that have a participation requirement for CCDF-funded programs, but that requirement is limited to programs serving children age 5 and under. So school-age programs are exempt in those cases. So it's important to note that this is just about school-age programs' eligibility to participate, not an indication of actual participation, except for where it might be required based on a program's funding stream. The profiles also include information on statewide after-school networks and National After-School Association state affiliates, which are organizations that provide training and other services to help serve school-age children in their state. Many networks and affiliates work directly with the CCDF lead agencies to help them with school-age care issues, and in a number of cases, the same organization serves as both the statewide after-school network and the NAA state affiliate. So I just want to show an example of an appendix. This one presents the first several data points from the profile, the percent who are school age, the average monthly subsidy, and the average number served each month. So data are arranged by state, so you can quickly see trends and variations across states, and closes with the aggregate figures included in the national profile. There isn't anything new in the appendices. It's just a different way of presenting the data from the national and state profiles. And I know it's probably really hard to read these figures if you're looking at this in the webinar view. But the main thing that I want you to see is how the data are arranged so that you can see that you could pick a data point of interest and then quickly scan across states and get a sense of how they are similar or where they differ, or in the case of specific policies, get a sense of which states have that policy or practice in place without having to toggle back and forth between individual state profiles. So in the appendices, you can see some of the variation that exists across states. For example, when it comes to the percent of children served through subsidies who are school age, it ranges from a low of 15% to a high of 52%. And the percent of children served through subsidies who receive care in family child care settings ranges from a low of 1% to a high of 70%. So there is some considerable range here around some of the data points that's really interesting to see when looking at the appendices. So I'm just going to pause here to see if we have had any questions come in so far before I move on to walking you through the actual database and states. And it looks like we have nothing so far. Great. All right. We will go ahead and move on. So here we have a screenshot of the state database. We really encourage you to check out the About section because that gives you a detailed overview of school-age childcare issues and explains all of the data points and data sources that we used in putting this resource together. And it also includes some caveats about what we aren't yet able to explain with the existing data. So under National Resources, you'll find the national profile that we previewed earlier, as well as the full report compilation that it contains introductory information, the national as well as all 56 state and territory profiles, and all of the appendices. And you'll also find additional resources and contact information for school-age serving organizations. And through the drop-down menu, you can select a state and go straight to that state's information and profile. So I'm going to pick Illinois as an example to share. So on each state's page, the first thing you'll see is a box with links to resources and contacts related to school-age care, including information on the state CCDF lead agency, the 21st Century Coordinator, the state after-school networks, the NCASE state affiliate, and the Child Care Resource and Referral Agency. And then at the top, you can also access the actual state data profile, which presents the same information as the national profile, but specific to the chosen state or territory. We also include information about which agency or agencies oversee each aspect of CCDF administration in that state. So you'll see that in Illinois, there are some departures from the national averages. For example, overall, 45% of children served through subsidies are school age, but in Illinois, that figure is 51%. And the national average for children served through subsidies who are in family child care settings is 26%, but in Illinois it's nearly half at 48%. And Illinois also has a much higher percentage of children served through subsidies in their own home, 18%, compared to that national average of 4%. So as I said before, we don't yet know what's driving those variations, but we're really intrigued by that, and that's something that we plan to explore in the coming year. So on the second page of each state and territory profile, we have checkboxes to denote whether or not a particular policy or practice or entity is present in that state. So keep in mind that none of the policies or practices listed here are required of states as part of their implementation of the CCDF program, but rather they represent practices that states can choose to adopt that have implications for school-age childcare. So in Illinois' case, there is a state-funded network of CCR&Rs offering consumer education. The lead agency's training and PD requirements do include supporting the positive development of school-age children. The state does offer grants and contracts, and they do so at least in part to help with the supply and quality of school-age childcare. And the state has a QRIS that allows school-age programs to participate, though there is no participation requirement for programs receiving CCDF funds. The state also has a statewide after-school network and a state after-school association, National After-School Association state affiliate. And then this is just one example that I pulled out to show, but when you have a chance to go and look at the database, you can go through every single state and territory and take a look at each one individually. All right, so like I said, these data profiles are brand new. So as we launch the product in the database, we are hoping to gather feedback from you and other stakeholders about how useful these data profiles are and how they might impact the work that you do. We're hoping that we and others will be able to use the data from the profiles to build a better understanding of school-age issues and inform the training and TA services and products that we create to advance this work. We also want to solicit ideas for additional data that stakeholders would like us to pursue that can identify additional needs related to school-age care. And while we can't promise that we'll be able to follow up on all of them, your ideas will help us to identify knowledge gaps that we can help address that could benefit school-age landscape. So if you have ideas already of things that you would like us to look into, please feel free to type it into the chat box and we'll compile a list based on your suggestions. There's also going to be time at the end for Q&A where we can engage a little bit more around some ideas that you have. So as we're looking for examples from everybody in the field, we also have identified some of our own that we know are key areas that we hope to do some additional data dives in the coming year. So for an example, right now there's no central source of information about whether states offer school-age child care credentials. So what we're doing is mapping out which states offer credentials and what the credentials entail, such as the requirements for earning the credentials, how the program is funded, specific benefits that credentials confer upon people who earn them, etc. And as I mentioned earlier, the QRIS and school-age information included in the profiles only notes whether school-age programs are eligible to participate in the QRIS, not what the actual participation rate of school-age programs is. So while there are a handful of states that appear to require all subsidy-accepting programs to be QRIS rated, others do not, and we are interested in examining the extent to which school-age programs actually do participate in the QRIS where they are eligible to do so. We're also really intrigued by the wide variations in the increases and decreases in the numbers of children served through subsidies during the summer months, and we're going to be examining what might be driving those trends. And then finally, we're also really interested in mapping out school-age child care deserts so that we have a better sense of access needs. There's been some great work done in this area to map out child care deserts related to child care and education programs for very young children, but not so much for school age. So again, we invite you to take some time to check out the database and the profiles, talk to other stakeholders in your state or region, and then let us know how these data profiles can help to inform your work and what you think we should look into as we continue to build on this work going forward. So our next presenter is Jen Reinhardt, who Tony mentioned is the Senior Vice President for Research and Policy at the Afterschool Alliance. Jen oversees some of the Alliance's major initiatives, such as America After 3 p.m., an ongoing study of how children in America spend their after-school hours. And in addition, Jen works closely with the statewide after-school networks to help them use research to advance their state policy goals and to engage them in federal advocacy efforts. Prior to joining the Alliance, Jen was a project officer for the 21st Century Community Learning Centers program. So Jen, before we move on to the work of the Alliance, I wonder if you could just take a few minutes to share your thoughts on how these CCDF data and these profiles might be of use to stakeholders working on these issues.
Sure, I'd love to. Hi, everyone. Nice to talk with you this afternoon. I hope you all share the same excitement that we have here at the Afterschool Alliance for these new data profiles. We have been anxiously awaiting these. I have been coordinating with Heidi and Tony in the development of these and sharing whatever information we could related to the 21st century side of things. But over the years, we've tried to create much smaller, simpler kind of snapshots of what's happening with CCDF in states and just have not had the bandwidth here to do that with the focus on 21st century and many of the other funding streams that support after school. So we're really excited that NCASE has the capacity to dig into this and has the connections through the Office of Child Care and some of the other contractors to really access information that none of us have had access to before. So we're excited about that, definitely have already used the profiles in our work and shared them with states who have asked us questions about what are other states doing, how many other states are using contracts, for example, so that they could explore that perhaps in their own state or with other stakeholders like funders who are interested in understanding the landscape of after school and in particular the role that the Child Care Development Fund plays in that landscape. So very excited and see a lot of great potential for putting these profiles to use. So with that, I'm going to turn and talk a little bit more about the work that we do and how we see that work really complementing what NCASE has been working on with these profiles. Afterschool Alliance, we are a national nonprofit working to help ensure that all children have access to quality after-school programs. And you can see on this slide that our work really falls into four main buckets. Field building, really helping to support the field with the kinds of tools and resources that are needed. We do that through things like webinars, events, taking our research materials that are produced and really providing them in very easily comprehensible materials for the field. The research efforts that we have include things like America After 3 p.m., which Heidi mentioned already, a set of issue briefs that we produce on topics that kind of tie into hot issues for the field. So what are the things that the field is really struggling with or maybe really excelling in, and how do we turn those into materials that can be shared with various stakeholders? We do a lot of work around policy at the federal level and also supporting policy work at the state and local level. And of course, communications resources. And these on this slide look like very clean buckets of work, but the truth is they're very much interconnected, and they're all designed to really support one another and to help us reach this ultimate goal of ensuring that all kids have access to quality after-school and summer programs. So I thought we'd start with a look at our largest research project, America After 3 p.m., as a way to really put those child care figures that Heidi shared with you all in the larger context of how many kids are in after-school programs. And we can tell from America After 3 p.m., which is a national household survey of more than 30,000 families, and that's been conducted over a 10-year span, that the number of kids participating in after-school programs has grown by roughly 40% over those 10 years, from 6.5 million kids in programs to 10.2 million kids in programs. And about half of those kids participating in after-school, and this is across funding streams, right? About half of those kids are from low-income households. And while it's great news that more kids are in programs, unfortunately, the unmet demand for programs has also increased significantly. So you can see here that the parents of nearly 20 million kids say they would enroll their child in an after-school program if a program were available to them. And that means that the existing supply of after-school programs is barely meeting about a third of the current demand for programs. And for every one child in a program, there are 2 more kids who are waiting to get in. And these numbers from America After 3 p.m. we have at the state level as well. And I'll show you an example of a state fact sheet that we've created that we use to share that information with the field. As I mentioned before, a lot of our work focuses on the 21st Century Community Learning Centers program out of the U.S. Department of Education, main funding stream that supports after-school and summer programs for about 1.7 million kids in total. We have a national fact sheet on 21st Century Community Learning Centers. We have things like summaries of evaluations from the state level and much more that show the important role that 21st Century is playing in supporting kids, families, and communities. And then here you can see, like NCASE, we have our own state-specific resources for the field. We take the work that we do for America After 3 p.m. and we combine that with the 21st Century research and our overall after-school research to produce these state fact sheets. This is our state fact sheet from Nebraska that pulls together information from the state-specific evaluations that we have of after-school, as well as state-specific participation and demand numbers. So some of the numbers on this fact sheet come from America After 3. Other numbers come from evaluations that have been conducted at the state level. Others come from data that's specific to 21st Century in the state, and really bring all that information together into one place so that folks can find whatever they need to know about after school in Nebraska in this instance. These sheets are actually in the process of being updated right now. So when you go on our website in about a month, you won't see a sheet that looks exactly like this. There will still be a state-specific fact sheet, but that fact sheet will not look like this. So just flagging that in case you're looking for these in the future. Each year we update our fact sheets to make sure they have the latest information. And we're in the process of doing that right now and then kind of revamping the overall format and layout. The content of the sheet in terms of the types of information that are there will remain the same, but it will have a different look. We know that state-level resources like this are incredibly important for folks who are working at the state and local level. We know that they're used to communicate with important stakeholders. They're frequently cited in things like proposals for funding, or to help make the case for why a particular program is needed and what the research says about the effectiveness of after-school programs. So we see This set of fact sheets that we develop, again, with a strong focus on 21st century and overall after-school context information, being a nice complement to the kinds of profiles that NCASE has just produced. And we know that the data and facts that we have are much stronger when they can also be combined with great visuals and images. So we have a set of videos that really complement those fact sheets and that anyone can use to help communicate the importance of after-school programs. So you can see on the slide now the link to access those videos, and they cover a range of topics that really complement the other resources that we have, like our issue briefs, for example. Many of the materials, including the state fact sheets that we've been talking about, are used for public awareness building. Here you can just see two of the major events in the field at the national level that happen every year. The first is Lights On After School, which happens each fall and is a national celebration of after-school programs. It's really a chance to show off what after school offers to help kids and families and communities. And this year it happens on October 25th. And then also highlighting Summer Learning Day, which is an annual celebration of summer programs that is organized by the National Summer Learning Association, and we work closely with them on that and often do joint events. But those are definitely two events where folks could really use those state fact sheets as like a handout or a resource to give to stakeholders who might be coming to visit a program in the course of one of those events. And then lastly, I thought I would close with just a couple of the new resources that we have coming in the next year or so. We are working on a return on investment study for the field that will help people make the case that investing in after-school programs pays dividends, and trying to figure out exactly how much that pays. We're also looking at a worker productivity research project that would show how much more productive parents are in the hours after school if they know that their child is in a safe, supervised environment. America After 3 p.m., as I mentioned before, is something that we do every 5 years. So 2019 is on the calendar for our next round of America After 3 p.m., and we hope to have updated figures to share with the field at that point that hopefully will show the continued trend for increasing numbers of kids participating in after-school programs. And then we have an ongoing project called our After-School Impacts Database, which is a place where we gather evaluations from across the country and put them in a searchable database so that folks who are looking to make the case that after school improves college readiness, for example, can search specifically for the kinds of outcomes they're looking for and then find the studies that connect to those outcomes. And then what you see on your slides now is one of our communications efforts. This is a new campaign that we're launching that really provides that aspirational view of after school and what after school programs can do for kids. It's a way to really show like a child's progression from something they participated in at an after school program where they may have really discovered their passion or something that they're really good at or they really want to explore more deeply, and then how that could potentially turn into what they do in the future. So it's a way to portray this inspirational role that after-school programs play for many children in their learning and kind of their lifelong trajectory. And then lastly, you can see kind of a different version of those same kinds of materials showing some statistics about what's happening for kids and families in our country today, and then the role that after-school programs are playing in helping kids and families to cope with whatever that situation may be. So it's a way to really incorporate real statistics and highlight urgent problems of families and talk about how after school is a vital solution for those kids and families. So those resources will be available more broadly later this year. We're working with some of the statewide after-school networks right now to help get them out in the field. And then lastly, just some contact information for us at the After School Alliance. If you go to the website there, afterschoolalliance.org, you'll see a link to information in your state, and then you can click on a map and access the fact sheets that I shared, and then in about a month, the updated fact sheets that will be available as well.
Thank you so much, Jen. This is Tony Stride again from NCASE. And Jen, we really appreciate Alliance's work and perspective. What we're going to move into now is some Q&A and discussion. And as Preeti shared, if everyone can post your questions in the chat pod, we'll get to those as we move forward. Jen, I wanted to actually start with you and prompt a question because I'm particularly intrigued by what you're finding year after year as the increased demand for out-of-school time. I think you showed that each time you went back to stakeholders, you saw an increased number of families. Do you have some sense of what's triggering that demand?
So that's a really interesting question. We had a theory when we started doing America After 3 p.m. that the way this would work would be that as we increase the number of kids in after-school programs, that unmet demand would go down, right? The idea being like kids move from this bucket of unmet demand into a bucket of having after-school programs. And while we are seeing some kids move from unmet demand to actually being served, what we're also seeing is new kids showing up in that unmet demand bucket. And we think that really is about the public awareness efforts that all of us in this space have been playing, and more families getting excited about the potential of after-school programs, and not just thinking about it from like a safety perspective, which of course is critical, but also thinking about it from the perspective of their kids missing out on some critical learning opportunities that they might not otherwise get if they weren't in an after-school program. So I think it's really that public will building that many of us in the field have been working on for many years, and we're seeing that show up in the data with more kids in programs, but then also more kids wanting to be in programs.
Thanks, that's great. So we have a first question in the chat, and again, if anyone on the line has a question, please just type it in there. Heidi, I'm hoping you can take this one. It's from Kathy, and yep. She asks, do you have any data on how school-age providers receive through QRIS? I noticed you have the average monthly subsidy for school-age childcare. Does this include enhanced payments from QRIS?
Yeah, so the quick answer to that is no, we do not have that data right now, but this is exactly the kind of thing that is super helpful for us to hear from folks like you as to what would be a really useful data point for us to pursue in the future. So like I mentioned, we have some things related to QRIS and school age that we do plan to look into already, such as what is the actual uptake and participation with school age programs who aren't required to participate but are eligible to. But knowing that there are these additional points that people would find interesting can help us bundle together a set of asks within a data dive to coordinate that a little bit better and make it streamlined. So this is really useful information for us to have, and that is definitely something we can add to our list of things that we want to look into. How might we acquire this? Would we be able to get that across all states? So thank you for posing that question. I'm sorry I don't have an answer for you at the outset, but we will definitely add that to the queue of the things that we're going to hope to be able to pursue. One thing I did want to invite is that for the folks who responded to the poll about how they think they might be able to use some of this in their work, I'd really like to invite you to say a little bit more if you just want to add a few more details in the chat. You know, for example, when you say that you might use this in trainings, how do you see this being useful in trainings? Are you talking about just using the actual information in this in the training that you do with people, or using this to inform the type of training that you're providing? That would be really useful information for us to have. And then one person mentioned responding to legislative questions about school-age care. We'd really be interested in knowing what types of questions you have gotten so far that you've been trying to field that this might help to answer, because knowing what types of questions are coming up from different folks in the field can help us figure out how might we be able to play a role in addressing those questions and answering that through our data work going forward. So whoever it was that was responding to the poll with those areas, if you wouldn't mind, if you're still on, just typing in a few more details about how specifically you see this data coming into play with your either development of trainings or implementation of trainings, and then what types of questions you've received thus far from folks, whether legislatures or otherwise, that data can help to answer. And then we'll see how we might be able to round that out with some additional data dives. I see some people are typing, so we'll just give a little time for people to write in there. So we've got another comment from Dana that says Hawaii Department of, I'm assuming that's Human Services, also provides state funds that are for TANF matched to the Hawaii Department of Education for the Department of Education's A+ program. I believe it is a significant amount that assists the Department of Ed in operating the A+ program, and I don't know if that is covered under the 21st Century funding information. So Jen, I think you're probably in a better position to answer that than I am, if that's something you want to take on in terms of what goes into the 21st Century data that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. So no, that wouldn't be covered in the data that we share. The data that we provide on our state fact sheets, for example, is specific to the 21st Century Community Learning Centers information that we get either from the Hawaii Department of Ed or via some calculations that we make to estimate the number of participants based on the amount of funding that flows to the state. But there are a number of states that have their own state-specific funding streams that support after-school programs as well, with Hawaii being one of them. And I know that the Hawaii After School Network gathers some statistics from across the funding stream, so something that would include, say, 21st Century, this new information that NCASE is making available, and then also what they know from the Hawaii Department of Ed about the state-level funding stream. The California After School Network, for example, does that as well for their ACES funding, which is their state funding stream. And they put together a state-level report that shows how many kids are in after-school programs across 21st Century and ACES. So a number of states have resources like that kind of pull from these national resources to create an even fuller picture of what's happening in a state. There are other states that are using TANF funds to help support school-age care, and we try to track that, but we don't always have the most up-to-date information. Sometimes things shift where a state was using TANF, and then the legislature makes some changes, and they can no longer use TANF. So we don't have the best picture of that, but we do have some anecdotes from states that are using TANF.
And related to TANF, just wanted to say, I know we pulled out just 4 particular points to share with you of things that we know we're interested in pursuing going forward, but we've got a much longer list than the 4. And TANF is definitely one of the things that we want to look into more, because we're really curious to see if there is a way to tease out on a more granular level when it comes to the TANF transfers into CCDF. Is there a way to look at how much of that is going to support school age? You know, again, a lot of this is very exploratory. We're not sure whether or not these are some nuances that can be teased out, but it is definitely on our radar as something that we want to look into in the coming year in terms of the contributions of TANF and how those are actually supporting school-age care in particular. So one other thing, because, Dana, you brought up the issue around state contributions and state programs. You probably heard me say way back in the beginning that on the database website there's a section called About, and it contains a lot of information about the data sources and more details about the data points, as well as some caveats around the limitations of what we've gotten so far and what it can explain. One thing I really want to put out is that with the data that we have around the ACF data, that is based on the federal contribution to a state or territory's CCDF funding pool and the funds that states are required to contribute. Many, if not most states, contribute over and above the requirement of what they have to put into the CCDF pool, and those over and above contributions don't factor in to the data that we have reported thus far. So we are exploring whether or not there is a viable way for us to try to capture and account for that in future iterations of this. We don't yet know, but we are aware of the fact that there are those additional contributions that many states make beyond the requirement, and that therefore their numbers, when they account for that, are a little bit different than what the official data say. So we are aware of that, and we're exploring different ways that we might be able to look at that and incorporate that moving forward.
So this is Tony again. We have a few more minutes for questions. Again, if you can post them in the chat room. I believe another one is coming in right now. We have a couple, and so please share your questions. Also, any work that you'd like us to expand upon. We do intend to update these profiles annually, so your recommendations for other data points to dig into is greatly appreciated. So Megan asked if there'll be a recording of the slides in the webinar. The answer to that is yes, that we always archive these. It takes a little bit to make them 508 compliant, but we'll share these out with everyone who registered for the webinar after the event. Three colleagues there also pointed out that you can download them right under the file pod right there. So by all means, do that. The version that'll come out will be transcribed for those who might want that. A few more comments coming in. So Tanisha has a question from New Jersey, CCRR. Do we know if there are any funding coming down the pipeline to support technical assistance and quality improvement for school-age childcare? Heidi, I think you and I can take this as best we can. We're not aware of any new funding at this time, but the existing funding as intended as a portion of CCDF funds is what each state is receiving, and we don't have any updates on where we're at beyond the present. Anything else you'd share, Heidi?
No, I mean, I'm not aware of specifically earmarked funds for school age that would be coming down the pipeline. You know, states have a lot of latitude to decide how to spend their quality improvement dollars, and certainly that is an area where they could choose to do that. And we know that there's a lot of interest in the degree to which states are choosing to spend their quality improvement dollars on issues related to school age. Again, that's not information that's currently captured in a categorical way across states. So we are looking into how we might be able to tap into what's happening with that. One thing to keep in mind is that as a national center, our primary interest is figuring out what can we say that would be common across all states and territories, as in what data could we reasonably gather across all states and territories. So that's always a challenge in terms of there may be a way to get at some of this information through 2 or 3 states, but if we can't get it across all, it's a little trickier for us as a national center to try to go after that. But that is something that we know people are really interested in. Another thing that I saw that Kathy sent in is whether or not 5-year-olds included in the data are considered to be in school. That's a really interesting question. So one thing that we looked at is we went to look state by state to see how states were defining school age, and most of them were saying kindergarten and up. Many said 5, and then when we cross-referenced that with what the kindergarten age of entry was, it was more often than not 5. So I think it is definitely something that you can think of as a proxy for being in kindergarten. That's certainly not going to be exactly the case for all kids within all states. But again, as in the past, when the 5-year-olds were not part of the school age group, there was a significant number of kids who were in fact in kindergarten who were not included in that school age calculation. So it's one of those things where it's a difficult area to put a fine point on where is that cut point, but we are really thankful that ACF has expanded that to include the 5 to 6-year-olds because of how many of them are already in kindergarten and thus needing after school and summer child care.
So just sharing, there was some back and forth about state plans. Jeannie shared the previous state plans, and the current state plans are being worked on right now. States eventually put those out for comment, but you'll have to check with lead agencies for the status on that. At this point, I want to share an update for everyone and then wrap up, although if you have any last questions, do share them in the chat room. Wanted to make you aware of an upcoming event where we'll be sharing this data further and engaging stakeholders in a discussion about the use of data. That's at the upcoming Infant and Toddler and School Age Child Care Institute. This is the second joint institute that we're hosting together. It will be May 23rd and 24th in Baltimore of this year. And if last year's event was any indication, it was really a wonderful opportunity to look at what we sometimes call the bookends of the child care continuum, the infant and toddler world and the school-age child care world. And so Heidi will again be giving a presentation on these data and talking about how it can be used. Know that a save the date has gone out to state and territory lead agencies for the Institute. They're encouraged to put teams together of various stakeholders from the state to attend, and further instruction on attending will be going out very, very soon, but we hope to see folks there. And then again, if you have thoughts about what we've shared today, if you'd like to see other research take place in the year ahead, please reach out to us. Here's the contact information, both our website and the email where you can make requests to NCASE. We'd greatly appreciate your input. There'll be an evaluation of this webinar in just a couple of minutes as we log off. You'll be asked to respond to just a few questions to give us feedback on the event, because we're always eager to have that from you and to hear your input on the work we do. And finally, I just want to share thanks to our fellow presenters, to Heidi, all the wonderful work you did on this, and to Jen and the Alliance. We really appreciate our collaboration with you. We thank everyone for joining us, and we look forward to talking to you again in the near future. Thank you.